While I've been reading Western comics since I was a child, it wasn't until recently that I started dipping my toe within the waters of manga and anime. It wasn't that I had a negative connotation of manga or anime, I just didn't know where to start, other than whenever I was a kid and watching Toonami, so Dragon Ball Z and Naruto were the only touchstones that I had. So since the time that I started making YouTube videos, I had been experiencing different aspects of the medium and being introduced to manga and anime as a result. So many times I'll be covering a video and one of my mutuals or friends of mine would reach out and say, hey, if you like this, then you might like this manga, or you might like watching this anime. And it turns out that 9 times out of 10, I end up enjoying it. And that actually brings me to the topic of today's video, Goodbye Eri by Tatsuki Fujimoto. This book was recommended to me last year whenever I released the video on cartoonist Zoe Thorogood and her career up to that point through a retrospective. Her work delves into the aspects of the autobiographic novel genre, talking about the life of a creator and witnessing her life through a perspective that only she can provide to us. When I released that video, so many people had told me that Goodbye Eri is something that is very much in conversation with it. And now I see why. Not just Goodbye Eri, but the vast majority of Fujimoto's work has to deal with grief, imposter syndrome, and desire and passion of the creator. When delving into his work, I had taken a note that he couches the human experience within the supernatural. When researching why that is, Fujimoto had spoken in an interview specifically highlighting that he doesn't want a story to be forgotten by the reader, and instead he wants to tell the stories that are going to grip them from beginning to end, but also have something to say along the way. He also attributed a lot of his stories, and more specifically the pacing of each of the manga, to Korean films. He then went on to cite 2008's South Korean film The Chaser as an example, and going on to say, the main character chases after the villain, but 30 minutes into the movie he catches him. This is supposed to happen at the end of the movie, so you keep wondering what will happen next. A lot of people say that in Korean movies they cannot tell what the director is thinking, but actually if you watch until the end you'll get it. I wanted to make something like that. Goodbye Eri introduces us to the protagonist of Yuta, who is told to document his mother's final days as she's coming down with an illness that will inevitably kill her. Yuta then turns this morbid task that he's been given into an obsession that he has to record every single moment. This role that he's been given allows for him to retreat within himself, distancing himself from others because he is only witnessing the outside world through the lens, literally, of the camera. Yuta only experiences each moment as if it were a part of a film, and he's able to disassociate from reality further because every aspect of his life throughout this one shot is questioned if this is real life or if it truly is all part of a larger film that's within the head of Yuta. We witness the further decline of Yuta as he's documenting every single second of his life and having to export as quick as he's recording because he's utilizing so much memory and documenting every single moment. Of course, this culminates in the moment that his mother is actually on her deathbed and his father is asking Yuta to go to the hospital with him and see her because she wants Yuta to record her last moments and last breaths. And just as he's about to go into the hospital, Yuta realizes that he can't do this, running out of the hospital, and in a moment that takes place over multiple pages, almost like a slow motion scene within an action movie, we see the hospital blow up. And it's at this moment that it's revealed that the movie that Yuta was making is being shown in a talent showcase for his school. Almost immediately, the kids start bursting out laughing because they have no idea what they just witnessed, and if that was true or if that was very weird and off-putting of this child to document the last days of his mother. Is this fiction? Is this reality? Why is he blowing up the hospital? Nobody has answers. Yuta doesn't have answers. Yuta was mocked at the project that he made from the grief of losing his mother, and the only outlet that he possibly had would be for movies and being able to express himself to a room of his peers. And they laughed. And at this point in the narrative, it has a smash cut to Yuta talking to the camera, very much like a Logan Paul apology video, and he talks about how he's going to harm himself because of the people that picked on him, and he wasn't able to properly express himself, and now he wants them to feel the grief that he had during that moment and the documentation process of his mother's passing. And right before he jumps off of the roof, he stopped, and this is when we're introduced to Eri. Something about the beginning 30 pages and leading up to the time that we meet Eri is very fascinating, but it also further establishes where we're going in this narrative as we see the perspective and the POV of Yuta throughout the lens of the camera, even showing the shudders of the camera and the shakes as a kid is holding his phone. And you can see that subtle shaking because it's not on a tripod. It's something that's so inventive for Fujimoto to have that idea to present the story in this way, but also having the almost character acting behind the camera of Yuta experiencing each of these moments. He's able to document and he's able to put the lens into each of these moments and not being able to witness them with his own eyes. Establishing shots or reaction shots for the students that are in the auditorium is even more heartbreaking as we see the camera further shake, because more than likely what the reader is experiencing is the high anxiety of Yuta. So of course the camera wouldn't be still. Additionally, I really enjoyed the talking head moments of the students reacting to if they liked the film, which they didn't, but also them letting out that little bit of explanation for their answer. And you can see that there's a character acting aspect that it just blew me away with the subtle changes that Fujimoto is able to present and showcasing the varying emotions and responses of these characters, and almost not wanting to look Yuta in the eye, even though the eyes are not the eyes of the camera. When showing the jittering of the camera, especially as Yuta is running to the top of the building and about to jump off of the hospital, it's very interesting of how Fujimoto is able to present this, and more specifically that Yuta looks over the side of the building before jumping and then coming back and then looking over it again, because yes, of course somebody's going to be afraid of heights, especially from that height, but also he's really second guessing and asking for something or someone to stop him from doing this. This is another instance of Fujimoto putting us into the perspective of Yuta, whether we like it or not, and having that inner conflict in a split-second moment that is only able to be done within the comics medium. When Yuta meets Eri, she talks him off of the ledge, literally, but also just breaking the tension with a little bit of humility and comedy. But then she realizes who he is, and she whisks him away to an abandoned building and sits him down and tells him that they're going to be watching movies for the next 9 hours. And instead of second guessing this, Yuta just sits down and begins to watch the movies. After so many hours, Eri finally answers the question of Yuta about why they're doing this and why they're sitting in an abandoned building just watching movies on repeat, and she finally lets it slip that he needs to be watching more movies, because while his film was good, documenting the last moments of his mother's life, it can be better, and he's an amateur at making film. So in an attempt to remedy this, Eri is introducing him to different aspects of the medium of film, showing him how he can improve, almost like like a training montage in something like Rocky, but they just sit there and watch movies throughout the narrative. Eri is able to encapsulate the aspects of Fujimoto because him as a creator also believes that to be a good creator, you need to experience stories, and not just stories within the medium that you're trying to create. Fujimoto talks about breaking down scenes and stories that he enjoys and finding out how they work on a mechanical level, and then trying to incorporate that into aspects of his own storytelling. So obviously, if you have a wider pool of influences and references to pull from, you're going to be able to have an understanding on a mechanical level of how storytelling works and why that is. It's shown throughout the narrative that Yuta forms a closer bond with Eri, having this training montage be hand in hand with them forming this friendship. As before, Yuta didn't have any friends. He didn't have anybody to talk to really, but Eri allows for him to express himself throughout the medium of film, to vent emotions. As the training portion is coming to a close, Eri then tasks Yuta with coming up with an outline for his next story that's going to be the movie that they inevitably show as almost a rematch against the students and the presentation, because his first work wasn't good enough, and now they're gonna make something that's gonna make every single one of the students bawl their eyes out. That's specifically what Eri says. Yuta comes up with this outline, and it's a meta-narrative that incorporates the previously documented death of his mother, but then altering it so he's the protagonist and not truly Yuta. As he fleshes out this outline, he incorporates Eri into the narrative, but also establishing her as this vampire girl that's lived for so long, and she wants to be documented for this film because she's dying and she doesn't want to be forgotten. As the narrative moves on, Yuta and Eri have this kind of relationship that builds and swells, and we don't really know if this is a part of the movie or this is actually just them bonding throughout this process. In the time of shooting the movie, Yuta's father has this line that I love as a glimpse into the perspective of the creator, and even Fujimoto knew that this was a good line because he highlighted it in particular, with the characters outright stating that that's a pretty good line, right? With it saying, creation is all about getting into the audience's problems to make them laugh and cry, right? Well, it wouldn't be fair if creators didn't get hurt too, would it? As the story moves along, we then have Eri tell Yuta that she has an illness that she didn't tell him about before, but her time is coming to an end. And we still have no idea if this is a manufacturing of the narrative throughout the movie, or if Eri is playing along, or if this is just true and it happens to coincide with the narrative that Yuta is stating that the movie is going to be about. When Yuta is at a crossroads whether he should continue with this project and documenting Eri's final days in a similar fashion to documenting his mother's final days, he has this conversation with his father talking about the truth behind the original movie and how Yuta was abused by his mother, but that's something that Yuta conveniently cut out of the final product. It's able for Yuta to literally retcon what happened and how his mother is remembered because he trimmed out the aspects that don't make her look like a reasonable mother or a caring mother or somebody that actually is a good person overall. And his father even says, I know that I wasn't around enough and she was treating you awfully, but I just never had the gall to step in and defend you. And his father says that it's a gift that Yuta is able to present the whole life of a person and choosing how they are represented even when they are no longer with us. This speaks to the core aspects of being a creator. What do you leave behind once you're dead? Whether it's through their characters or through their narratives, we understand them on a fundamental level because whether they know it or not, they're incorporating some aspects of themselves into each of the characters. characters, which is something that Fujimoto is specifically known for. Yuta takes this conversation and he decides to go back and continue the project with Eri, completing her vision of the film presenting herself in the future and documenting her final moments. We witness another montage of their relationship over time and blurring the fact and the fiction, what is relegated to being a part of the movie and what is the actual experiences of these characters. And that isn't noted until after Eri is passed. And Yuta presents this new movie and documenting Eri's life up to that point to the entirety of the student body for another talent show. It's only revealed that Eri was not the person that was presented in the narrative up to this point when a girl says that Eri was kind of a bitch and she wore glasses normally and she wore a retainer, and Yuta says she didn't want to be shown to have that in any of the movie making process, which is something that Yuta honored. But then you realize that throughout the entirety of the narrative we haven't seen Eri with glasses or a retainer. So obviously Yuta cut that out of the narrative that he's presenting. Even the story throughout his perspective is retconning those aspects of Eri from how we experience that story. So then that calls into question every single interaction that Yuta has had up to this moment. Is he being vulnerable, or is he still shielding himself behind the camera and presenting only the aspects of the story that he feels comfortable with sharing? After this experience, we have this time lapse of Yuta growing up and becoming more obsessed with cutting and recutting this documentary that he had for somebody that he might have been friends with. And he's cut this movie so many times, he doesn't even know what is fact and what is fiction anymore. And maybe that is the unreliable narrator that we've been experiencing. Is Yuta even in his right mind up to this point? And that comes to a head whenever we see Yuta as he's grown up and he's in this similar pose that he had just as he was about to jump off the building right before he met Eri. He talks about his life leading up to that point, and realistically he says that would be a good life and he would be fulfilled on paper. But then he explains that he experienced a loss that's greater than anything that had predated it. He was in the car with his wife, his child, and his father, and they got into a car wreck, and he was the only one to survive. It's in this moment of self-reflection that Yuta is able to understand how he processes trauma, and saying that he did utilize the camera to distance himself from others. He tells the camera that he's tired of experiencing so much loss and it's time that he puts a stop to it. We then see flashes of him going somewhere after dark, and he has a backpack that has a rope in it. And then it's shown that it's the abandoned building that he would watch films with Eri in that building previously in his childhood. But as soon as he walks into the building, there's something that's lighting it up. And upon reflection, he's able to understand that that is the projector that's lighting up the movie that he made for Eri. And once he fully steps into the room, he looks at the couch, and there she is, sitting there watching the movies just as they used to do. He's baffled and he doesn't understand how this is a possibility, with Eri then saying that the movie's plot was true. She actually is a vampire. And you see her memory bank loads up like a SD card. And after a while she has to die, quote unquote, and then she revives after 3 days and starting over with a blank slate. So she wanted this movie to be made by Yuta so she could watch it, in a similar situation to like 50 First Dates meets Hancock, like having to re-experience this aspect of your life and you are just a passenger up to that point. It makes sense from a narrative perspective, but also it does feel like a high schooler's understanding of like Sixth Sense and 50 First Dates having the supernatural aspect that's reeling into the narrative. And honestly, whenever I first read the book, I wasn't a fan of it. I thought that this was a cheap cop-out to be able to incorporate her as this final moment and telling Yuta that he doesn't need to do what he's going to do, and it just didn't feel earned. But upon reflection and talking to friends of mine, I was able to really delve into the psyche of Yuta and understanding that him being an unreliable narrator is a core aspect of this story, and presenting it any other way would be a disservice to the character that we've built up to this point. Eri gives him an opportunity to sit down and continue watching movies with her, or to leave, because, like she already established, she doesn't like whenever people are talking through movies. So once again, Yuta is set at a crossroads. Does he stay or does he go? Where we then have him process the emotions of that moment. He can either indulge in his fantasies and living through this supernatural aspect of his life, or he can reject that and continue with a normal suburban life, trying to get better from the experiences that he's had all this time. And we watch as he walks out of the building, and at first he's upset, but over time and the more steps that he takes, it's a progression of him putting one foot in front of the other, and with that his emotional range changes from one that's upset and in despair to one that regained his autonomy. As he's finally able to clear the building, he has this realization about why he cut and recut the film for Eri so many times. And he says, "I never saw her again after that. You see, I'd finally figured it out. The reason I'd recut that film so many times." With him remembering the advice from Eri. It's missing a pinch of fantasy, don't you think? With him walking out with his head high, and we see as the building explodes. In actuality, Goodbye Eri is this encapsulation of all of the works leading up to this point and everything that Fujimoto has to say about being a creator. More specifically, the toll of the creative process, what creators leave behind, and the creations that represent them, and also how much of yourself that you put into the creations. Goodbye Eri achieved the goal that Fujimoto gives to all of his books, and that is that it won't be forgettable. It's the pontification of a creator that's experiencing career success and wondering what he'll leave behind once his career is over. It couches those unsettling emotions of reflection in a supernatural setting, but also incorporating the human experience that every reader can identify with. When I was making this video, I sat down with my friends Evan Von Doom and Gianni Palumbo to talk about their perspective on Goodbye Eri. But whenever it gets to the point where the friend of Eri and Yuta says that about she was kind of a bitch and she always had a retainer in and she always wore her glasses, you realize that throughout the entirety of this book, Eri never had glasses on and never had a retainer as far as we know. So every moment of this book that Eri is a part of the narrative realistically is only through the lens that Yuta wants to show us. So no moment in this book is Eri actually herself, and we're only getting the Eri that Yuta wants to portray. And I think that was fascinating to have that reveal, because you realize, no, we never actually met her. We only met the actress that's playing her.
Yeah. I think it's definitely like really complicated, because I see it in the same way that, one, we have memories of people, and two, we record memories of people. Because when we record things, like when you look back at your family videos, like if you ever sit down with your parents and they're like, let's whip out the old footage, and they plug it to the TV and it's like, oh, here's you on the merry-go-round. This is your first time on the merry-go-round. You're so happy. They always capture moments like that. They never capture the moments where they're like, here's where you killed your dog. And you're like, whoa. Why would you record that? Why would you save that? They don't keep those moments, so it's very like normal for Yuta to also kind of form that. I think the big difference between obviously us and him would be that we're not making a film, so there is even less control that we think about. We are just thinking about capturing happy moments. He is thinking about capturing everything and then editing it down to be specific. The difference between his mom and Eri, though, and I think the reason why we don't see Eri in these other lights is, one, it's a really good narrative choice. I think Fujimoto did a really fantastic job of choosing what to show and what not to show, and that choice leaves it very open to the viewer. So we get to see halfway through the story, we finally get to see like, oh shoot, his mom was abusive, and that changes how we viewed the entire first front half of the book. But as it continues, then we get that drop of Eri, and we never see that. We kind of get to choose what that actually looked like. And I think the big difference is he records Eri's death and doesn't record his mom's death. So it kind of, for me, gives an idea of like, oh yeah, Eri might have been rude and maybe impolite and like controlling, but she wasn't like a bad abusive person. I think we do see a pretty good depiction of who she is as a character, even though it's controlled. I think it's so layered, and that's why I love it. But the other side of this is that you were saying that Eri is in a way an actress, even if she isn't. She might be an actress, but even if she is playing herself, she's playing a role. But that's not different from how we all play ourselves, right? Like for me, for example, when I'm on camera, I take a second. When I'm in real life, I don't think. I just talk. When I'm on camera, there is a split second that I take to be like, am I going to say the right thing here? Or what should I say? Or how should I present myself? And even before I got onto camera today, I thought about, did I do my hair right? I don't even have that much hair. Like, did I do my hair right? What shirt am I wearing? Should I drink water beforehand? Like, all these things are going into me controlling my own narrative in this simple recording. So for me, I don't think Eri is a faker person or it's a false depiction of her just because there is an editing down of what we see of her. I just think we're seeing one of multiple sides of her, and we're getting her in her best light, which in this case I don't think is a bad thing. And that's what makes Eri such an interesting and fun character and kind of subject of the story, even though she's not the main character. She is allowed to be complex even before we know the twist of, she might have been like pretty rude in real life or like maybe even controlling or manipulative. We don't get to see that side of her. That adds actually a complexity, but even before we see that side of her, she's a complex character with complex emotions. Like, she knows she's dying. She's kind of like in this idea of like, she wants the same thing that Yuta's mom wanted. And I think she sees herself in both people. She sees herself in Yuta, and she sees herself in Yuta's mom. And she feels like she'd be honored to get preserved in the same way that his mom did. And I think she went about it in a much better way than his mom did, which is pretty low bar. But I think there's still an argument that she did manipulate him a little bit, though I don't think I would totally agree with that. I think she was a kid looking for a friend and looking for someone to pass the rest of her time with.
Another reason why I love Fujimoto so much is he's got the language of comics and cinema. Like that those are his big influences. Very similar to Frank Quitely, who I think has the same kind of sensibilities where he knows how to blend cinematic language and comic book language. I feel like Fujimoto like takes the position of like a cinematographer and a director in the way that he literally like blocks his scenes. That's one of the jobs of a director, is blocking. And what blocking is basically how the camera and the actors like interact in a scene. Everyone knows the master of blocking is Steven Spielberg. So if you want a good example of what that looks like, just watch a Steven Spielberg scene and you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. It's easier to see visually. All that to say is I think Fujimoto is kind of a genius, and I think is on another wavelength. When you look at his stuff, it's got this certain movement that nobody else can do in this medium. I think he's one of the most interesting creators right now. Yeah, and another thing with just the way that this book is formatted and looks that I love. Well, first of all, he's filming his home movies on an iPhone, and every single page aside from there's a few splash pages, it's all just 4 long panels to like simulate an iPhone. And the shakiness, I like your take on it. It's like his anxiety, because like this is a very deep personal movie that he's making, but I also just like, it's literally just him moving the camera around, and I think the blurry effect of that, it's such a great effect, and it's so immersive. Like you feel like you're actually watching him make the movie from his perspective. And yeah, I love the use of first person in this too. It's such a great device. Especially once you get introduced to Eri. There's the scene, my favorite scenes in this whole book is when they're in her, I guess, basement or kind of shed with the projector watching movies. And there's the parts where it's just from his point of view, and you're looking at her, and she's just talking to him about movies and about how weird he is. And that's why I love this comic so much, because this is a comic about making movies and the way we present ourselves, or the way that filmmakers like to present themselves in movies. And the difference between the person, the actual person, and the character that they play. I love that. That's probably like my favorite twist in this. I guess you would call it a twist. It's an amazing device. I love it. I want to talk a little bit about like, I guess like my kind of personal connection to this story, because I mean, this is my favorite of his kind of he does a lot of one shots. This is my favorite of his one shot. I don't really relate to like the darker aspects of this really, but when I was in high school, I made like short films all the time. Like, I wrote screenplays, I made short films. My plan was to go to film school. It ultimately didn't work out. I shifted more towards being like a critic of sorts, and I want to go down that lane. But rereading this like a couple days ago to prepare for this, it really brought me back to those days, and kind of sparked something in me. Like I kind of want to do this again. And part of the fun of this is just watching two people be creative and make these films. I've never, and the opening of this book I love so much, because like I've never had people sit down in a theater and watch something that I made like that before, but it would be awesome to do that. And I love the whole filmmaking aspect to this. I love when they're sitting watching movies together and she turns to him, she's like, no talking during movies, because I've done that. I've done that a lot.
If you like this video, you can give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. And lastly, I want to thank Forensic and all of my supporters over on Patreon that put up with this nonsense, me making videos on topics that I'm just getting into, and being able to explore different genres of the medium that I love. And I hope you do too. And if you want to support the channel through that way, you can also sign up and get these videos early for a subscription as low as $1 per month. And one last thing, go read some manga, or else.